All right. Good evening, everyone. Welcome back to another Classic Comics live stream here on Sunday night, where I'm going to go over some of the headlines of the past week. I wasn't here last week, so this is the first time in a couple of weeks. So, got a little catching up to do. Before I go any further, I want to thank everyone who takes the time to tune in and everyone who will watch on a live stream as well. All right. Uh, got quite a few things. Of course, Rotten Tomatoes has gotten caught paying for reviews. That'll be one of the first things to talk about. And that was actually, I think, last week, but I was not available to do this last week. So, again, kind of catching up. What else we got? Bob Iger and Bob Chapek, former CEOs of Disney. They apparently feuded over access to a shower. And let's see, Bill Willingham. So there's actually some comic book related stuff this week. So Bill Willingham, author of the comic book Fables, has decided to put his comic into the public domain to stick it to not Disney, DC Comics. And Alan Moore is being being Alan Moore and doing Alan Moore things. You know, he is. It is what it is. But let's go ahead and get into this. We'll start off with the Rotten Tomatoes story. So let me bring that up first. Okay. All right. So Rotten Tomatoes under fire after PR firms scheme to pay critics for positive reviews uncovered. And this is on IGN.com. While film and television reviews aggregator Rotten Tomatoes has come under scrutiny by filmmakers like Martin Scorsese before, a new report doubles down on why consumers may want to think twice before taking a recommendation from the website. In an in depth report published earlier today, Vulture uncovered a scheme from a PR firm called Bunker 15 to goose reviews for 2018 Disney or Daisy Ridley drama Ophelia. Yeah, I remember that. They did sort of a feminist reinterpretation of Hamlet that focused on her instead of on Hamlet. After initial reviews came in, resulting in a disappointing 46% rating on Rotten Tomatoes, a movie is deemed rotten if falling short of a 60% rating. Vulture reports that Bunker 15 started paying lower level critics on the website to post positive reviews for $50 a pop, essentially trying to manipulate the system. The firm also lobbied one critic to change their negative review to positive. As it turns out, the scheme worked and the money followed. Ophelia jumped up to a 62% rating, scoring that coveted fresh label. And the next month, IFC Films announced it acquired the film for distribution. Bunker 15, for its part, denied the allegations, with founder Daniel Harlow telling Vulture, quote, "We have thousands of writers in our distribution list. A small handful have set up a specific system where filmmakers can sponsor or pay to have them review a film." Understandably, many reacted to the report with a mixture of disbelief and sadness over how this could happen. Oh yeah, how could this have happened? I mean, whoever would have imagined, except just anyone with a functioning brain. People have been saying that Rotten Tomatoes is rigged for a while. Okay, so can we? All right, here we go. And although Rotten Tomatoes told Vulture that it takes the integrity of our scores seriously and does not tolerate any attempts to manipulate them, it's an alarming example of how easily critics, aggregators like Rotten Tomatoes can be manipulated, especially when there's financial incentive to do so. As the Vulture report notes, Rotten Tomatoes has become incredibly influential, both within the business of Hollywood and from the consumer's perspective. When it comes to the former, the example of Ophelia is a fitting one. When films debut at festivals like Sundance, as Ophelia did, companies monitor their reception to evaluate whether or not they should acquire those movies for distribution. Whether they're prioritizing commercial appeal or potential awards glory, how critics and other reviewers respond out of those initial screenings isn't without importance. And as for consumers, that's a little more obvious. For some, a Rotten Tomatoes score can make or break a decision to head out to the movie theaters or wait for a rental. While a fresh or rotten score isn't everything, many look to the percentage to get a quick idea of how they should spend their money. Okay, go away, you. Can I get rid of this? Oh, for crying out loud. Okay. To be clear, let's see here. Okay. Um, Filmmaker Paul Schrader puts it a little more bluntly in the Vulture report. The studios didn't invent Rotten Tomatoes, and most of them don't like it, but the system is broken. Audiences are dumber. Normal people don't go through reviews like they used to. Rotten Tomatoes is something the studios can game, so they do. Yeah, I mean it's not surprising. There have been some very puzzling results. I think particularly with Marvel films, there's been a sense that the scores for some of those Marvel films are much better than they really should be when they're not particularly popular with the audience necessarily. Like, Eternals is a good example. All right. We're going to move along here. All right. Okay, here's one about the writers' strikes, the Hollywood strikes. Let's take a look at that right quick. And this is from the Hollywood Reporter. Warner Brothers Discovery says ongoing strikes will mean $300 million to $500 million hit to 2023 earnings. Warner Brothers Discovery has lowered its 2023 adjusted earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization forecast to 10.5 billion to 11 billion, a hit of 300 million to 500 million, predominantly due to the impact of the strikes compared with the previously targeted low end of the 11 billion to 11.5 billion range. In a regulatory filing Tuesday, the company, led by CEO David Zaslav, who has been very engaged in negotiating with Hollywood unions to end the work stoppage, didn't detail when it expects the strikes could end, but updated its guidance that had previously assumed they would be resolved by early September, as management had mentioned during its second quarter earnings conference call. Uh, Uncertainty in the studio segment has increased with the dual strikes. Warner Brothers Discovery CFO Gunnar Wiedenfels, is that how you say that, has said this may have implications for the timing and performance of the remainder of the film slate, as well as our ability to produce and deliver content. And while we are hoping for a fast resolution, our modeling assumes a return to work date in early September. Should the strikes run through the end of the year, I could expect several $100 million of incremental upside to our free cash flow guidance and some incremental downside to our adjusted EBITDA. In its Tuesday filing updating its expectations for the full year, the company said, while Warner Brothers Discovery is hopeful that these strikes will be resolved soon, it cannot predict when the strikes will ultimately end. With both guilds still on strike today, the company now assumes the financial impact of Warner Brothers Discovery of these strikes will to Warner Brothers Discovery of these strikes will persist through the end of 2023. Here is a detailed look at Warner Brothers Discovery's full year 2023 guidance. So Warner Brothers Discovery's filing said it was now expecting lower adjusted EBITDA for the full year in the range of 10.5 billion to 11 billion, reflecting the company's assumption that adjusted EBITDA will be negatively impacted by approximately 300 million to 500 million, predominantly due to the impact of the strikes. Hello, Masters Maniac Mexico. Nice to see you, sir. Thank you again for stopping by. Yeah, no, the Rotten Tomatoes thing doesn't surprise me at all. Yeah, I think a lot of folks kind of saw this coming, and suspected there was something up with Rotten Tomatoes. It's just been very dodgy for years, it seems. The company also raised its free cash flow expectations for the full year to at least 5 billion. Further, the company now expects to exceed 1.7 billion in free cash flow for the third quarter of 2023, in part due to the strong performance of Barbie as well as incremental impact from strike-related factors, the filing said. Yeah, God, think of how bad it would be if Barbie hadn't made them so much money. The company is maintaining its expectation of achieving net leverage below 4.0 by the end of 2023, though, as well as its target gross leverage range of 2.5 to 3 by the end of 2024. The company will continue to update its assumptions based on the timing and any additional impacts of the eventual resolution of the strikes. It also highlighted Warner Brothers Discovery continues to prioritize and work diligently with other industry leadership to resolve the current WGA and SAG after strikes in a manner that is fair and values the important work of and partnership with the writers and actors. Sure. Yeah, sure you will. Uh Maniac Masters Maniac Mexico says, and now we will get Barbie parts in. Yeah, there's gonna be an avalanche of that stuff now. I think, the thing is, and obviously Barbie was woke, but it didn't go broke. It made a lot of money, but Barbie is a girl's brand. So it appealed to women, and women were going to go see that thing no matter what. It didn't matter if it was good or not. And even if they didn't like it, they were still going to go see it anyway because, they don't want to be the one in their group who didn't see Barbie. When conversation comes around to talking about Barbie, they all want to be in on the conversation. It's the same reason why there's so many women online who are into like Marvel movies and sci-fi and stuff now because they want to be part of the conversation, not that they really care about it. Okay. Uh all right, let's turn to Disney. So this is kind of an amusing story. This is from The Verge. So Bob Iger and Bob Chapek's CEO battle made Disney the pettiest place on earth. So the CEO and former CEO of Disney have been in a bit of a feud. Yeah. You'd go see He-Man no matter what. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, a lot of folks would. I probably would too. When Bob Iger stepped down as CEO of Disney in early 2020, he butted heads with his handpicked successor, Bob Chapek. But we really didn't know just how bad and how petty some of the things Iger did to express his unhappiness with Chapek's decisions were until now. This report from CNBC gives us a glimpse into what went on behind the scenes at Disney, spanning from Chapek's appointment as CEO in 2020. God, has it been that long ago already? To Iger's eventual takeover in 2022. And let me tell you, some of the drama that went on here is akin to Cinderella with CEOs. Here are the pettiest moments that we learned about. Okay, keeping the big office with the private bathroom. Despite his departure as CEO, CNBC reports that Iger wasn't ready to give up his expansive office at Disney's Burbank, California headquarters. After all, he would remain as Disney's executive chair for the next 22 months. The office came with a private shower that Iger reportedly used following his 4 a.m. workouts. On days when Iger would have to attend an event later on, he would take another shower in the office. Iger told Chapek that he lived for those 2 shower days, according to CNBC. Meanwhile, Chapek was left with a smaller showerless office on the same floor. Oh, the ignominy. As reported by CNBC, Iger's office bathroom had some choice decor, including a framed collage containing newspapers and magazine clippings about Disney's acquisition of Marvel. There was also a modified movie poster of Clint Eastwood's The Iger Sanction, which follows an assassin who exits retirement, take on one final job that replaced Iger, the German word Iger, Eiger, with Iger. Yeah, we get it. I actually did a video about Iger where I did the same thing. All right. Instantly regretting Chapek's appointment as CEO. So Iger started regretting the decision to make Chapek CEO as early as 2 weeks after Chapek's appointment, according to CNBC. When Iger, Chapek, and other Disney executives flew to North Carolina for Disney's annual meeting, CNBC reports that Iger gave Chapek the unexpected task of leading the question and answer session instead of Iger, even though the new CEO had only attended one annual meeting in his 27 years at Disney. CNBC reports that following 2 hours of general preparation with Iger, Chapek went to a private area at the back of the plane to study the information he needed to know. Iger apparently didn't like that. He reportedly told his friends that's when he realized he may have made a mistake, as he thought Chapek would work with him side by side for the next 22 months instead of doing his own thing. Getting mad at Chapek for not involving him in company decisions. Even as executive chair, Iger was reportedly missed at Chapek for not including him in company decisions. CNBC reports that Iger privately vented to friends that he, quote, felt like he was on a bus that the other passengers wanted him to drive, but that he couldn't reach the steering wheel. Iger surmised that Chapek wouldn't be the obedient lieutenant that Iger became to his predecessor, former Disney CEO Michael Eisner. Taking credit for running Disney during the pandemic. In the midst of the COVID pandemic, a report from the New York Times suggested that Iger had effectively returned to running the company, even after Chapek's appointment as CEO. Iger didn't deny this claim, writing in an email to the Times, quote, a crisis of this magnitude and its impact on Disney would necessarily result in my actively helping Bob and the company contend with it, particularly since I ran the company for 15 years. This didn't sit well with Chapek, CNBC reports, who called up Iger and said he didn't need a savior. Ooh. Failing to step in during Disney's conflict with Scarlett Johansson. In 2021, the Chapek controlled Disney stirred up issues with Black Widow star Scarlett Johansson when it revealed its plans to release the Marvel film in theaters and on Disney Plus for an added charge. But Johansson's contract didn't account for a streaming release, leading to a lawsuit that Chapek reportedly thought Iger would handle, as he had a long relationship with her agent and knew Johansson. I thought you didn't need a savior, bro. What's going on? Despite these connections, Iger didn't step in. Well, I mean, no. Why would he? According to CNBC, Iger believed the situation was a quote clear business matter, and that if Chapek wanted to be CEO, he should be CEO. Yeah, well, yeah. Iger also didn't speak up during a meeting Disney held with his lawyers, with CNBC reporting that he believed the discussion felt like amateur hour. While both Iger and Chapek eventually signed off on a public statement about Johansson's lawsuits, CNBC says neither approved of its harsh tone, which implied the actor was just after more money. However, after CNBC says neither Iger nor Chapek stopped its release because each believed the other should be in charge, Iger reportedly told Chapek to issue a public apology, but Chapek declined. Sources tell CNBC that Iger didn't even think about apologizing. Not mentioning Chapek during his goodbye party. When Iger held a retirement party for himself, CNBC reports that he reluctantly invited Chapek, who canceled his plans in order to attend the gathering. During Iger's speech, he noticeably left out Chapek, who sat away from Iger while visibly miserable. Privately talking to Disney executives after his retirement. Even after Iger stepped down as executive chair in December of 2021, Chapek still couldn't shake his influence. Iger still spoke with current and former Disney execs about Chapek and the company's future, some of whom asked him to return to the company, CNBC reports. Additionally, Iger reportedly met with Christina Shake, I guess that's how you say it, Disney's newly appointed chief communications officer, which CNBC says Chapek viewed as dining with the enemy. Taking Chapek's ideas for Disney's linear networks. On top of all this, Iger recently hinted at selling some of Disney's linear channels, an idea of Chapek's that Iger reportedly hadn't been fond of in the past. Chapek also pitched a streaming only version of ESPN that Iger is now pushing forward, with reports suggesting that Disney is looking for partners to take a minority stake in the network. That's not the only move Iger has made that contradicts his previous stances. While Iger reportedly wanted Disney Plus to be the cheapest streaming service on offer, he's following in Chapek's footsteps by cranking up the prices yet again. Whether Iger wants to admit it, he may now see reason in some of the business decisions made by Chapek. Yeah, because Chapek had to come in and clean up his mess. In July, Iger extended his contract with Disney through 2026, and according to CNBC, he really plans on retiring this time. He means it, he really does. But the question of who Iger will pick as his successor and whether he'll be able to keep his hands out of Disney after their takeover remains. Yeah, I mean, he was bashing Chapek for a lot of the things he was doing, but he was doing it because he had to cut costs because the company was bleeding money because of all the things that Chapek had done. Masters of Maniac Mexico says neither Chapek nor Iger are any good for Disney, although I think Chapek was the minor catastrophe. Well, yeah, I mean, it depends on how you look at it, but Iger is now, circumstances have kind of forced him. He's having to make sound decisions, or at least not shy away from making tough decisions about the business. Sounds like two little boys fighting over a sand shovel. Come on and do your job. Yeah, really. Yeah, it's just kind of laughable how Chapek hated what or Iger hated what Chapek was doing. And the main thing Chapek was doing is he was firing people, he was cutting people, he was trying to cut budgets, cut costs, and then Iger came in, and now what's he doing? He's doing the same thing. All right, what do we got next here? Uh, uh, don't really need to do another. I'll skip that. I'll save that for another day. Okay, so let's talk about Alan Moore. Oh boy. So this is from the Hollywood Reporter. Okay, Alan Moore told DC Comics to donate his future screen royalties to Black Lives Matter. Uh, so Alan Moore says he's pivoted his approach to sharing royalties, now opting to have DC Comics send them to Black Lives Matter. In a new interview with The Telegraph published Wednesday, the comics legend behind Watchmen, V for Vendetta, Batman, The Killing Joke, The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, and more spoke about his journey into literary publishing following the release of his short story collection, Illuminations. During the lengthy chat, Moore opened up about how his perspective on the state of comics has changed how he shares his royalty, in addition to talking about his thoughts on Frank Miller's The Dark Knight and why he's increasingly opted out of public appearances. I tell you, that dude, he is like borderline obsessed with Frank Miller. Seems like every time he does an interview, he's got to take some kind of shot at Frank Miller. While speaking to his own works like Watchmen and V for Vendetta, both of which have been adapted for the screen, the artist, who has long refused to have his name attached to screen adaptations of his work and has frequently been critical of said adaptations, revealed he stopped sharing royalties with the movie's writers. Quote, I no longer wish it to even be shared with them. I don't really feel with the recent films that they have stood by what I assumed were their original principles. Moore said. So I asked for DC Comics to send all my money from any future TV series or films to Black Lives Matter, unquote. As part of the interviews, the writer who publicly retired from comics several years ago and said he's partly, quote, foregone public appearances in favor of a quieter writer's life. And after finding at comic conventions, I talked to people and they were looking at me like they were having some sort of religious experience rather than an ordinary conversation. He once again spoke of his grievances with modern comics. Yeah, he has a few. At one point, he called Sin City creator Frank Miller's The Dark Knight, quote, a pretty sub fascist vision, adding that, quote, the idea of one man, perhaps on horseback, who can sort out this mess, that's a bit too birth of a nation. Well, yeah, or like the Lone Ranger. I mean, it's not like, okay, whatever. Discussing the group and what does sub-fascist even mean? Okay. Discussing the growth of quote adult fare in the comics industry, Moore addressed his own role in it, noting, quote, I didn't mean my experiments with comics to be immediately taken up as something that the whole industry should do. When I was doing things like Watchmen, I was not saying that dark psychopathic characters are really cool, but that does seem to be the message that the industry took for the next 20 years, he added. Yeah, I will give him credit for that, is that he's never really kind of drunk his own Kool-Aid, he's never totally bought into his own hype. I will give him credit for that. I do think he's been pretty open about how he kind of regretted the direction that comics took after he did Watchmen and the role that he played in that. And actually, if you look at a lot of his stuff from the kind of earlier mid 90s, a lot of it's much lighter, kind of more traditional comic fare. The From Hell creator, who has been exploring the fantasy genre with an upcoming set of novels, not only limited the gentrification of comics that happened post Watchmen, what he believes fantasy has been shaped into by the success of shows like Game of Thrones and films like Lord of the Rings. Quote, fantasy these days seems to have been boiled down to a kind of J.R.R. Tolkien, George R.R. Martin world of warriors and dragons, and for some reason, dwarves. The fantasy books that inspire me are things like Mervyn Peake's Gormenghast trilogy, which is actually about the real world in some ways, the changing nature of British society, he said. Fantasy has no restrictions whatsoever, so it's a bit lame to be constantly hitting the same note on the piano, he continued. Let's have fantastic visions that nobody has ever seen before and lay off people of restricted height for a change. Well, he has a point. I do think that, as much as we love some of these franchises, whether it's in sci fi with things like Star Trek and Star Wars, or in fantasy with Lord of the Rings, Game of Thrones, what have you, Wheel of Time, there is a certain kind of sameness that has crept in because when something becomes popular, then people kind of inevitably start imitating that. And that stuff is what gets the attention. So you've got, the fantasy genre is heavily skewed towards Tolkien like fantasy worlds, and sci fi is heavily skewed towards sci-fi for space opera, for lack of a better term, with where there are people in spaceships flying around having space battles. And that's good, but it's not the only possibility. And he's right that I think sometimes, there is a bit too much of a sameness and a bit too much of I'm not coming up with the right word, but a bit too much of predictability to some of the stories that we get in fantasy and sci-fi. Okay. And as for as for donating his money to Black Lives Matter, I mean, I think that kind of shows how kind of out of touch he is. Because if he was paying attention, he'd know that Black Lives Matter is pretty much a scam. But, whatever. Okay, now here's another interesting one. This is another comic book related story. So this week, comic creator Bill Willingham, who created a comic called Fables for Disney, or for Disney. I keep wanting to say Disney, for DC. I believe it was part of its Vertigo line for a while. He has now put Fables into the public domain because he got tired of DC screwing him around in terms of paying him royalties. So this is from CBR.com. Bill Willingham puts Fables into the public domain. Now, Bill Willingham, the creator of the long running Vertigo series Fables, which was recently revived as part of DC's Black Label line of comics, has announced that he is putting the characters into the public domain as a result of years of disputes with DC over his contractual rights to the characters of the series, which is about a group of mythological beings who were exiled from their homelands to go live among humans. Mark Buckingham and I've never been able to say this name, Steve Layola, Le, Lealoa, have been the art team throughout most of the series, but Willingham has been the sole owner of the IP rights to Fables. Yeah, a lot of not all of it, but some Vertigo stuff was creator owned back in the day. Willingham announced that as of tomorrow, 15th of September 2023, the comic book property called Fables, including all related Fables spin-offs and characters, is now in the public domain. What was once wholly owned by Bill Willingham is now owned by everyone for all time. It's done, and as most experts will tell you, once done, it cannot be undone. Tape backs are neither contemplated nor possible. This move does not affect any of the works already in print, and Willingham still plans to collect all owed royalties for past work and any future royalties based on license deals DC makes for the Fables characters. And he actually goes into this on in length on his Substack. Um, where? Oh, here it is. Uh, no, where he talks in length about it right here. This is you don't have to get through a paywall to read this. So if you're interested in reading or learning more about this, you can go to his Substack and check it out. I would encourage you to do so. I'm a bit of a fan of Bill Willingham myself, although I'm not really a big Fables fan. I was more a fan of, what I know Bill Willingham for primarily is back in the early days of RPGs, and I'm talking like late 70s and early 80s. He was one of the top artists who was doing interior art for like adventure modules and books and stuff like that. Initially, I believe his stuff was on being done for Villains and Vigilantes, a superhero role playing game, the first superhero role playing game, as far as I know. But then he quickly graduated to doing artwork for TSR, which was publishing Dungeons and Dragons and some other things. And then by the early 80s, he had actually graduated to doing comics. He did one of the first really popular kind of creator owned comics of the 80s, direct sales, direct to comic shop series called Elementals, which it was one of the first comics that really kind of pushed the envelope. Well, I say first superhero comic, I should say. One of the first superhero comics that really pushed the envelope in terms of violence and profanity and sexual content. He pretty early on in the 80s was having his characters. The stories could get pretty gory. Uh, anyway, let's get back to this. So Um, Willingham notes that since it has been so many years since he first struck his creator-owned arrangement with Fables, with DC, there is little to no one left that actually dealt with him at the time, and so no one at the company seems to know or is willing to honor the terms of his agreement. One example he gave was regards to a deal DC struck with Telltale Games to do a Fables video game in which Willingham says he was not paid royalties he was owed. Yeah, in his Substack he talks about this, and this is one of his big sticking points. They did a Telltale game, I guess, Fables video game, and he's not been paid anything for it. And since he owns the property, he should be getting paid. But DC is like, nah. To quote the critical drinker, nah, it'll be fine. Don't worry about it. When they capitulated on some of the points in a later conference call, promising on the phone to pay me back monies owed for licensing Fables to Telltale Games, for example, in the execution of the new agreement, they reneged on their word and offered the promised amount instead as a consulting fee, which avoided the precedent of admitting that this was money owed to me and included also a non disclosure agreement that would prevent me from saying anything but nice things about Telltale or the license. unquote. He pointed out that, quote, at that point, since I disagreed on all of their new interpretations of our long-standing agreements, we were in conflict. They practically dared me to sue them to enforce my rights, knowing it would be a long and debilitating process. Instead, I began to consider other ways to go. So he explains that he chose to take the fight to a different arena. Since I can't afford to sue DC to force them to live up to the letter and the spirit of our longtime agreements, since even winning such a suit would take ridiculous amounts of money out of my pocket and years off my life, I'm 67 years old and don't have the years to spare. I decided to take a different approach and fight them in a different arena, inspired by the principles of asymmetric warfare. The one thing in our contract that DC lawyers can't contest or reinterpret to their own benefit is that I am the sole owner of the intellectual property. I can sell it or give it away to whomever I want. I chose to give it away to everyone. If I couldn't prevent Fables from falling into bad hands, at least this is a way I can arrange that it also falls into many good hands. Since I truly believe there are still good people in the world, or more good people in the world than bad ones, I count it as a form of victory. As to whether Willingham can legally put characters into the public domain in a way other than disuse. And obviously, since the comics are basically perpetually in print, disuse would likely never occur. It is unclear. Jonathan Bailey writing at Plagiarism Today in regard to Tom Lehrer doing a similar move with his music and lyrics noted, quote, there's no certain way to put works into the public domain. Even the Creative Commons C Even the Creative Commons CC0 is a waiver of rights, not a dedication to the public domain. Even then, it's only, quote, to the extent allowed by the law, unquote. There are a lot of conflicting theories about how and if one might dedicate a work to the public domain, but one of the problems is that any such dedication could be seen as an unenforceable promise and one that could be revoked at any time. Willingham, though, clearly believes that he can do this legally, so it might just be a case of simply seeing what happens to the first person who tries to publish new Fables works. Either way, it's a stunning move by Willingham that will likely send shockwaves through the world of intellectual property rights for years to come. And of course, DC has their own view of this, and we'll take a look at that as well. Yeah. Okay, and this is also from CBR. DC releases a statement on Fables. It is not in the public domain. DC has responded to Fables creator Bill Willingham's announcement that he has put Fables into the public domain with an official press statement sent to CBR stating that Fables is not in the public domain and that it will take all actions to protect its intellectual property rights. Willingham, of course, argued otherwise when he released a press release claiming that as of 15 September 2023, the comic book property called Fables, including all related Fables spin-offs and characters, is now in the public domain. I've read that already, so I won't go over it again. It's done, and as most experts will tell you, once done cannot be undone. In response to CBR's article on Willingham's announcement, DC sent CBR the following statement. The Fables comic books and graphic novels published by DC and the storylines, characters, and elements therein are owned by DC and protected under the copyright laws of the United States and throughout the world in accordance with applicable law and are not in the public domain. DC reserves all rights and will take such action as DC deems necessary or appropriate to protect its intellectual property rights. Characters in Fable were all actually based upon public domain characters to begin with, but the specific version of the characters in the series are still distinctive and copyrightable. For instance, while the Big Bad Wolf in general cannot be copyrighted, Big B Wolf, the Fables version of that character, specifically can. Yeah, I mean, Fables was basically, it was like if you ever saw that TV show Grimm, I think it was called, which had a bunch of fairy tale characters like in the modern day. That's basically what Fables is. And so they're all technically public domain characters anyway. It's just his specific interpretations of them. What do the copyrights for Fables say on the matter at all. As part of his press release about putting Fables in the public domain, Willingham noted the one thing in our contract that DC lawyers can't contest or reinterpret to their own benefit is that I am the sole owner of the intellectual property. I can sell it or give it away to whomever I want. Writer Zach Rabirov posted on social media that the most recent Fables copyright filings list Willingham as the copyright holder through written agreement with DC. And there's a here. This guy, Zach Rabirov, says, interesting. Three subsequent copyright filings list the copyright holder as Willingham, with DC's copyright transferred by written agreement. I'm not a lawyer, so I can't draw any firm conclusions. Well, that would certainly seem to support Willingham's argument. Of course, the keywords here are through written agreement, which suggests that the true reading of this situation would require examination of the specific contract details that Willingham and DC have with each other. A general requirement for the protection on intellectual property rights is that you have to actively defend them. So DC making a relatively rare public statement on the matter lines up with that approach. However, without further specific details as to what the contractual situation is between DC and Willingham, much of the legal analysis on the matter will remain speculative. Suffice it to say, though, that anyone thinking of taking Willingham up on his released copyright will face a legal challenge from DC. Yeah, so this is probably going to take years to get hashed out in court if it gets hashed out at all. But as they say in this article, I mean, anyone who tries to make use of Fables is going to face a lawsuit from DC. So, for all practical purposes, this isn't going to change anything anytime soon. Maybe once it gets settled in court and the actual disposition of the intellectual property is determined. Who knows how long that'll take, though. But yeah, I mean, Willingham was upset about not getting paid what he felt he was being paid. And as he mentioned, they were just doing a lot of things with the characters that, they were not consulting with him or anything. He did mention in his Substack that they were making changes to characters in various ways without consulting with him. Now, he didn't specify, but considering how DC operates these days, it's not hard to figure out that more than likely they were going to make everybody gay, probably race or gender swap a lot of characters, that sort of thing. Make it, accessible to modern audiences. All right, where are we at here? We're at 7:42. Let's move on here. There's one here about the writer's strike, but I'll skip that one. Let's see. Okay, here's one. So this is from Bounding into Comics. Okay, Marvel Studios visual effects unit unanimously votes to unionize and demands fair pay for the hours they work, healthcare, a safe and sustainable work environment, and respect for the work they do. In a seemingly inevitable move, given their employers' sorry about that. In a seemingly inevitable move, given their employer's notorious reputation for running the unit ragged in service of milking the franchise with visually noisy release after visually noisy release, Marvel Studios' visual effects team has unanimously voted to take a stand against their overbearing bosses and unionize under the wider banner of the International Alliance of Theatrical Stage Employees. This decision was first announced on September 12th and followed as a result of a unit-wide open vote in which every ballot cast was in favor of unionizing with Iatse. Unanimous, really. Everybody voted for it. In a statement provided to Variety, Iatse VFX organizer Mark Patch explained, today VFX workers at Marvel Studios spoke with a unanimous collective voice demanding fair pay for the hours they work, healthcare, a safe and sustainable working environment, and respect for the work they do. There could no longer be Or there could be no stronger statement highlighting the overwhelming need for us to continue our work and bring union protections and standards to all VFX workers across the industry, he added. And there could be no stronger example of the courage and solidarity of these workers than each and every one of them declaring union yes. Likewise, Iatse, President Matthew Loeb declared, quote, today's count demonstrates the unprecedented demand for unionization across new sectors of the entertainment industry is very real. To these VFX workers, I congratulate you on your historic victory. Your bravery, determination, and unity are a beacon for workers not just in VFX, not just in entertainment, but workers in every industry across this country and beyond. You will enter negotiations with Marvel and Disney with the full backing and support of our 170,000 strong alliance. Your fight is our fight. One of the unionizing Marvel members, studio VFX coordinator Thomas Bernard, beamed, this is historic and I'm glad to be a part of it. Not only will this radically change the game by increasing the quality of storytelling through our work, it's also a huge step forward for taking care of the unsung individuals who helped to build the industry. Currently, the VFX unit is said to be preparing for their inevitable collective bargaining negotiations with Marvel Studios higher ups, though no concrete dates for these meetings have yet to be set by either party. However, unlike fellow Hollywood Guild members in the Writers Guild of America or the Screen Actors Guild and American Federation of Television and Radio Artists, if the Marvel team is not actively planning to engage, uh, the Marvel team is not actively planning to engage in any sort of strike. As noted above, this unionization move by the Marvel unit comes as no surprise given the reportedly brutal work conditions visual effects artists are being subjected to across Hollywood. Speaking to the topic in a video shared to his personal TikTok account, industry VFX artist and production coordinator Zach Mulligan cited such recent VFX horrors as Axel's talking head portal in Thor Love and Thunder, the awakening of the titular hero's third eye in Doctor Strange of the Multiverse of Madness. Yeah, that did look bad. And the whole of Modoc's existence in Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania. And explained, quote, in the past couple of years, it seems like there's been an increase in the amount of complaints about bad CGI and superhero movies. And there's a good reason for this. I mean, well, it's not good, but you'll see what I mean. The way, oh dear. Why did they do that? It's not like Doctor Strange has a third eye on his head in the comics, but whatever. The way that VFX companies get work is that Marvel and WB and other studios will approach VFX companies and say, hey, I have 2,000 shots that I need for this sequence, and the VFX studios will place a bid based on that quantity of shots, he detailed. But here's the catch the amount of work per shot varies dramatically. So one could have wire removal, smoke simulation, fire sim, face replacement, green screen. And despite the difference in workload between those two shots, they both are considered just one shot each. Because of this, VFX artists are forced to work relentless hours, overtime almost every day, including weekends, Mulligan continued. But here's the kicker if the VX companies aren't meeting the unrealistic expectations that these studios are setting, they risk losing out on future contracts. And there's only so many studios that are making superhero movies anymore, which means the VFX companies have to bend over backwards to hit these insane deadlines from these Hollywood studios. Even if you look at movies like Avatar, The Way of Water, that took 10 years to work on, the technology and just develop the VFX that looked this amazing, you might think the takeaway from the studios would be, well, if we spend more time working on the VFX, they might actually look good, right? The former Black Adam production coordinator then rhetorically raised to his audience, let me fill you in on a little secret. Movie studios don't care about good CGI. They just don't. The only thing they care about is pleasing their shareholders on their next earnings call. To them, they've managed to increase the output of superhero movies that are still making billions of dollars, and they've reduced the time it takes to make them, he elaborated. Studios could easily space out their projects to give these super talented and hardworking VFX artists more time to work on the film, but that's just not in the best interest of the shareholders. Instead, they increase the pressure on these artists to deliver faster and faster results, no pun intended. Drawing his thoughts to a close, Mulligan ultimately admitted, when you're putting out this many projects with shorter turnarounds, the VFX will always look worse. Yeah, and I mean, like they say in the article, it was pretty much inevitable this was going to happen if they kept pushing it this way. I mean, hopefully this will lead to VFX looking better. You know, we can only hope, right? Okay, what I got about 10 minutes left here. So let's see. I got time for what, maybe two more stories. So what I want to do here. Let me see. I've got about five or six stories to choose from. Okay, I tell you what, the Aquaman trailer came out this week, so let's do something Aquaman related. Let's bring this up. And again, this is from Bounding into Comics. Uh, Warner Brothers not marketing Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom because they know it's bad. They know it'll lose money. Okay, a new rumor claims that Warner Brothers Discovery is not marketing Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom because the company knows the movie is bad and believes it will lose them money. How do I get rid of this stupid ad? Will you? Okay, well, I'll just try to ignore it. Okay, the rumor comes from Scooper. No, stop. Good Lord. This rumor comes from Scooper Casey Walsh on X, who responded to a question about why an Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom trailer has not been released yet, despite the film set to arrive in theaters on December 20th. Walsh wrote, because they know it's bad, they know it'll lose money, and they aren't putting a marketing budget behind it at all. Well, we did get the trailer earlier this week, but it may have been in response to that tweet, though. That may have been why they did it. The latest rumor comes after a report from the Hollywood Reporter's Boris Kitt claimed that the film underwent its third set of reshoots since it finished principal photography in January of 2022. The previous two reshoots took place between the summer of 2022 and the beginning of 2023 and were done due to the film receiving uninspiring test screenings. Kitt detailed an insider informed him that this third set of reshoots was being undertaken due to the issues of story clarity. The idea that the test screenings for the film were uninspiring was previously reported by Scooper's Viewer Anon, Big Screen Leaks, and Jeff Snyder back in February. Viewer Anon claimed, quote, I'll be honest, we're half a dozen test screenings in and it's not looking great. I've consistently heard over the last half year or so that it's boring, not as good as the first, and potentially one of the worst DCEU movies. Big Screen Leaks would then seemingly corroborate this claim, writing, here's a reason I've been avoiding any questions about Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom, but since Viewer Non put it out there, it brings me no joy to back him up and tell you that test screenings for this film have not been good. Really hoping Wan, that's James Wan, the director, fixes this movie before December. Scooper added in a follow-up tweet, I heard that something that almost never happened in the test screenings happened in this with this movie. They're really going to need to fix this one and fix it fast. Snyder then commented, I hear it's terrible, and that's why Momoa is going to be Lobo going forward. But they can't say that yet because then it would be a lame duck, and DC is hoping to wring another billion out of the box office. First one was awful too, so not a huge surprise. Okay, I don't think the first one was awful. I mean, I'm not going to say it was an Oscar winner or anything, but I enjoyed the first one. As for the problem of story clarity, James Wan seemed to confirm it in a previous interview with a Hollywood Reporter, where he revealed that he, quote, had to make adjustments all along the way in order to adapt to the various visions for DC with the constant changing of leadership. Wan added, the DCU has been through lots of different versions, and one of the things that was challenging about this film was keeping track of what's going on. While he managed While he admitted he was seemingly constantly making changes to the movie because of the changes in direction at Warner Brothers, he also claimed that the Aquaman movies were detached from the DCEU, so those changes weren't really that big of a problem. One explained, fortunately, the Aquaman universe is pretty far removed from the rest of the world. We're going to many different underwater kingdoms that are not necessarily related to what's happening with the other movies and characters, so we're standalone in that respect. So I can just tell my story on its own without being affected too much, but at the same time, I have to be mindful of what's been happening. Interestingly, the first Aquaman film is the highest grossing DCU film to date at the global box office with a $1.1 billion haul. It also has the second highest grossing domestic box office haul with 335 million without factoring in inflation. If you factor in inflation, the film falls to fourth behind Wonder Woman, Batman versus Superman, and Suicide Squad. Really? Suicide Squad? That surprises me. However, recent DC installments have bombed at the box office. The two worst performing films are Blue Beetle and Shazam Fury of the Gods. Uh, I won't go over the numbers for those. They're awful. We all know. We all know they're bad. It would not be a surprise to see Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom continue on the trajectory that recent DC films have followed, that being downward 6 feet under. Oh, get it? 6 feet under. And that's not even counting, if you go back further, I mean, before that, there was Black Adam, which tanked, and before that, what was the last one before? I think the one before that was the Suicide Squad, the James Gunn Suicide Squad. That flopped, although that was released while COVID was still going on, so you can maybe give that an excuse. Um, and then before that, I think it was Birds of Prey, which was a flop, and then before that, Wonder Woman 84 was a flop. I mean, so it's just, ugh, it's been brutal. All right. I got time for one more here, and then we will wrap it up. Let's see. Okay, this is an interesting one. And again, this is from Bounding into Comics. Okay, Marvel's Fantastic Four film will see team originate not just from the 1960s, but also a different universe. Building upon one of the most prominent rumors surrounding the film to date, a new whisper on the web has suggested that the Marvel Cinematic Universe debut of the Fantastic Four will see them not only emerge into the current day from the 60s, but also an alternate universe. The latest word regarding the silver screen return of Marvel's first family was first raised on September 9th, courtesy of scooper Grace Randolph. Oh boy, Grace Randolph. Following the running of a poll in which he asked, based on the recent tip by fellow scooper My Time to Shine Hello, that the actor had reportedly been approached to play Reed Richards. Oh God, this is poorly written. Okay, so Jake Gyllenhaal was offered the role of Reed Richards, and she put a poll up on her Twitter or X or whatever you call it, asking people's opinion. Like, should he be the new Mr. Fantastic or stay as Mysterio? Well, he's not going to play Mysterio again. Randolph revealed that she had also heard that the most recent draft of the Fantastic Four has them coming not just from the 1960s, but also from a different universe than the main. This information would later be corroborated by fellow scooper Daniel Richmond, who roughly 22 minutes after Randolph made her initial reveal took to his personal Twitter account to divulge the exact same information as ostensibly received from his own sources. Maybe. Notably, this rumor is given a level of credence by the fact that this is not the first time scoopers have made mention that the eponymous team will originate from some version of the 1960s. In November 2022, Richmond himself informed his Twitter followers Marvel Studios' upcoming Fantastic Four will be set in the past in the 1960s. They will be a team out of time. Neither Kang nor a Doom is the villain, he added. Kang will be in the movie, but he's there to connect the group to the two Avengers movies. It's not strictly an origin story, but we'll see. Hmm. Further, given the fact that Marvel in both their films and comic books has taken to using the concept concept of the multiverse as a get out of jail free card to swap around different versions of any given character, usually with the goal of introducing an iteration that is more acceptable to modern standards. It's likely that the studio will fall back on their favorite excuse in order to explain Mr. Fantastic's supposed recasting from John Krasinski, who portrayed the stretchy hero in Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. However, as far as tight lipped information regarding the film goes, Marvel has been incredibly tight lipped. All that's known for sure is that the film will be helmed by One Division director Matt Shackman and written by Jeff Kaplan and Ian Springer, the two-man team behind the indie comedy Bird and Arnie's Guide to Friendship. I've never heard of it. And further, Marvel has confirmed that barring any delays caused by either the ongoing strikes or unforeseen disaster, Fantastic Four will emerge from the multiverse on February 14th, 2025. Well, you're kind of missing a trick if you're not releasing it like on July 4th, or something like that on the 4th of a month, but whatever. What do I know? Okay, so we're at an hour here, so that's going to do it for me. I think I will stop there. I want to thank all folks who tuned in to listen and those who tuned in on the rewatch. I want to thank the folks who stopped by during the stream, and I'm going to go ahead and sign off. I'll probably be back next week doing it again. So I hope to see you then. And if you do happen to stop and listen to this stream, hey, why don't you give me a sub? Maybe sub to my channel, check out some other videos while you're here. And oh, Masters of Maniac Mexico says, I'm pretty much done with that before it comes to the cinema. Yeah, probably. Yeah, we'll see. Like I say, like they say in the article, they probably are gonna make it an alternate universe version of the team so that they can, gender and race swap everybody. But we'll see. We'll see how it goes. Anyway, good night, folks. Have a good weekend, and I will see you all next week.